Luffy's latest and greatest transformation, the ever-long-awaited Gear 5th, is here. And with it, a whole new world of power is in Luffy's possession. Yet for those who truly possess the world as we know it, the world government, Luffy awakening his Devil Fruit is one of the worst things that could possibly happen, to the point of them imprisoning a Cypher Pole agent of great potential for even knowing a semblance about the fruit, and furthermore sacrificing one of their greatest to deter this latest boon in strength. Not to mention their incurring of a Yonko's wrath in the form of Kaido, despite the precedent of such a thing by way of the former Yonko, Whitebeard, resulting in the biggest war of modern times at Marineford. Yet even despite all that, apparently, the potential future proposed by Luffy's rise in such a way would make them beg for such an alternative. And with Luffy in fact being alive, the world government is sure to be pressured in ways unseen for several centuries. But what if I told you that that very same power they so fear is one they have sought to not only suppress, but control? What if I told you the world government once desired their very own Joy Boy, a clone even? Now, to better understand how and why the world government was attempting to create a Joy Boy clone, we need to first talk about Smile. These are artificially created Zoan-type devil fruits that have been eaten by thousands of beast pirates, resulting in three categories: the gifters, who have successfully received powers from Smile, the pleasures, who are deemed worthy and fail to gain powers, and the waiters, who are essentially on the list to receive said fruits. The artificial devil fruits were moved to the center of the story during the Dressrosa arc, when the Straw Hats arrived and ultimately destroyed Doflamingo's kingdom. Smile devil fruits are Caesar Clown's attempt to achieve what Vegapunk had previously for the world government. Now mind you, Caesar himself and Smile are not a part of the government's plan to create their very own Joy Boy. However, from Caesar's version of the product, we may better understand the more relevant and seemingly successful Vegapunk version of the experiments. Smile devil fruits have a 90% failure rate, so 9 out of 10 individuals that eat such an artificial devil fruit in hopes of obtaining greater power are met with terrifying results. Terrifying results that now, after the recent Joy Boy reveal in chapter 1044, are especially telling. When someone has eaten a Smile devil fruit, if they fall into the 90% that do not gain powers, they are then forever unable to swim, and on top of that, they are also forever unable to express any negative emotions. Regardless of how they truly feel, and regardless of what happens, they are forced to laugh and smile through it all. In other words, anyone who eats a Smile devil fruit is unable to express anything except joy. Pretty interesting, right? Now there is a specific yet unexplained reason for all this that until chapter 1044 we are unable to put together, but more on that later. Before we move on from the Smile though, there are two more aspects of it worth mentioning. Firstly, sad, and secondly, the use of lineage factors or bloodline elements in that. Before its destruction on Punk Hazard, sad was stored in a large metal tank and was one of the key ingredients in Smile. Not too much is known about the details of sad, however we do know that at its core is the use of bloodline elements. The initial study and use of bloodline elements comes from Vegapunk, so Caesar's base is of course derived from that, as well as the whole Smile project itself. The real genius, no disrespect to Caesar, was Vegapunk. The bloodline elements of various animals make up sad, and thus, once this is put into fruits for consumption, will then allow the consumer to receive the abilities of an animal. That is of course when it goes right, because again, 90% of the time, it has resulted in failure. Now let's get a key point about Vegapunk's artificial devil fruit out of the way. It was a mythical Zoan fruit, the very same classification as Luffy's Hito no Mi fruit, which we once knew as the Gomu Gomu no Mi. This is quite the coincidence. However, the deeper we look, the more you may come to realize that not all things are coincidences and are instead rather obvious clues as to what the world government intended to do regarding Luffy, the Gomu Gomu no Mi, and the Warrior of Liberation, Joy Boy. Vegapunk, however, foiled those plans and chose to do the right thing. Vegapunk became employed, or rather imprisoned you could say, by the world government at some point, and since then has developed many great things for them. While he is a genius and he invented things that turned out to be used for evil, he himself is not evil. And if you choose to consider him evil, I think we can at least agree that he isn't on the same level as Caesar. Vegapunk has done things like refuse to experiment on children, help Kuma, and express concerns regarding Caesar creating dangerous chemical weapons. The guy isn't just looking to wreck the world for profit or anything like that. This aspect of his personality is what led him to making a key decision that has either saved the world or at least given it more time. Now with that in mind, let's consider what happened with the artificial mythical Zoan fruit he created. To our knowledge, this was the first time there was an attempt to create an artificial devil fruit. The unnamed devil fruit that Momonosuke later on ended up eating was created using the bloodline elements of the Yonko, Kaido. Now, despite their extreme rarity, there are of course multiple mythical Zoan fruits in existence. In fact, considering the fruit of Sengoku, which will come up again later, the world government already has access to a mythical version of the Hitohito no Mi that they could extract from. So why Kaido's? Well, simply put, I'd imagine they would not want to pass up such an opportunity. After all, Kaido is known as the world's strongest creature. It is important to understand that although Vegapunk may have his own hidden ideals and or agenda beyond the surface, the direction of his pursuits and research are likely to be decided for him by those in power. Kaido's full beast form boasts the biggest Zoan type transformation on record. It is the epitome of such extravagance. And interestingly enough, in the world of One Piece, actual dragons are the stuff of legends that even Devil Fruit users may have a hard time comprehending their existence. Creatures decidedly of such high esteem that, like Sun God Nika, are associated with the concept of godhood by way of the celestial dragons. So much so that not only did Vegapunk create this artificial version of Kaido's mythical dragon fruit, but he is also responsible for the creation of artificial draconic life forms, of which we have seen two. And according to Brownbeard, one of these creatures was so admired by the celestial dragons that they gave it a name, which he honestly failed to recall. And this happened to be the flame-breathing one, mind you, so there may be a link. Regardless, the creature's function at the time of the Straw Hats happening upon it was to guard Punk Hazard. Now, what's even more fascinating is that this particular dragon was said to be capable of adapting to any environment. And you might just think that this is rather fitting for the especially volatile environment that is Punk Hazard, but it is important to remember that the island was not always like this. Things only ended up this way after the clash between Akainu and Aokiji. Now, considering the overwhelming safety of Mary Joyce, such a creature capable of withstanding several direct hits from the post-time skip Straw Hats would certainly be unnecessary. However, the region Mary Joyce belongs to, the Red Line, is notorious for its many different biomes, perhaps pointing towards a desire for these celestial dragons to line the exterior of their home with representative beings of power. That being said, it took 13 attempts for such artificial life forms to succeed. And the 14th attempt, although also a successful creation, was of a different sort as opposed to being an exact copy, which exemplifies Vegapunk pushing the boundaries even further. Yet oddly enough, Vegapunk was supposedly never satisfied with the results of his artificial dragon devil fruit and deemed it a failure, leading to it being stored and undisturbed at Punk Hazard until, of course, Momonosuke ate it. Yet at this point, we very clearly know that this was in fact not actually a failure. After all, Momonosuke uses the fruit amazingly now. Originally, it seemed as though there were glaring side effects. However, those no longer seem to be present. The issues to be found were likely related to Momonosuke being a child who struggled to control the power, which isn't unlike what we saw from Luffy and his fruit at such an age, and that's relevant later on as well. As far as we know, there are no fundamental issues with this artificial devil fruit. So then why did Vegapunk believe it was a failure? The way we see it, Vegapunk knew it was a success. There is more reason to believe he knew it was successful and little reason to believe he truly considered it a failure. For starters, how could something like a devil fruit be deemed a failure without being consumed? Even if the fruit's appearance was not what Vegapunk had anticipated, as we all know, looks can be deceiving, especially in the world of One Piece. It truly does not matter what a devil fruit looks like. What matters is what happens once it is consumed. I mean, do you really find it believable that this ingenious scientist said to be responsible for scientific achievements whole centuries ahead of his contemporaries would conclude his own experiment to be a failure without proper testing? I mean, come on, even if it was a failure, it would still need to be properly tested to gauge what went wrong for the purpose of making better versions. And that's another interesting and very important thing. Unlike the over a dozen attempts at making a dragon, there are no other attempts at making this fruit. Not that we know of, at least. Is it not at all suspicious that this genius scientist had one perfect artificial devil fruit stored away with no sign of later or previous versions? The reality is likely that Vegapunk created this fruit and began his experiments for the world government and later regretted it, either because he learned the true reason behind why they were interested in this research, or he came to his own conclusions about how dangerous this sort of thing could possibly be. A sentiment even shared by a CP0 agent who was rather relieved that such a thing was a failure, clearly fearing the ramifications of such a scientific breakthrough. And again, because Vegapunk is a literal genius, we are sure he already knew the possible consequences of being able to artificially create devil fruits. It is a pretty simple conclusion to make, that the world government would have a stronger army than ever before. I mean, just look at the Beast Pirates who operated using the ineffective smile fruits. Despite a 90% failure rate, they have created one of the strongest pirate crews in the entire world. This is an obvious outcome that anyone could consider. While it is still possible Vegapunk only later came to truly realize what he was creating, all else considered, we believe in Vegapunk learning of something worse than that outcome. Knowing this was done with a mythical Zoan fruit, and the fact that the Hito Hito no Mi and other Zoan fruits are known to have a life of their own, or at least will of their own, which has had the fruit continuously escape the world government, we believe this experiment was a way to get around those issues. The world government wanted to artificially create the Hito Hito no Mi to awaken and control something they fear, the power of Joy Boy. In chapter 1044, we learned that no matter the era, for 800 years, the world government has always failed to acquire the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Generally, most devil fruits are worth over 100 million belly. However, as estimated by Garp, the projected worth of the Gomu Gomu no Mi is over 5 billion belly, a price comparable to the likes of Law's fruit, which is heralded to be the ultimate devil fruit as it is capable of granting eternal life. Mind you, that would mean Luffy's devil fruit itself is worth more than any living Yonko by quite a margin. Now that is what we would call suspicious. Although cloning the fruit would also create the possibility of a situation where they no longer need to chase after it. Not only that, but it is also possible that the will of the fruit is weakened by creating an artificial version. Again, we can look at Caesar Smile fruits for more on what all of this looks like. A side effect for some successful Smile Devil Fruit users is a lack of full control over the power. Some have animal body parts that have a will of their own instead of the usual situation where the user has full control over their new upgrades. Because Caesar's version is an opportunity to see what went wrong with Vegapunk's version, we can assume full control of the fruit's capabilities with no real outside will would be the goal, meaning a Zoan fruit with less free will, one that cannot escape the world government. The best question to ask is, why would the world government want their own Joy Boy? The simplest answer to that being the possession of what they cannot have. A deep-seated greed and lust for the unachievable, to subjugate that which opposes them. It is the very same concept that outlines the use of the pacifistas. Sure, Kuma himself is especially powerful, with one of the most capable fruits in the world, but truly they did not need his body to be the framework for their cybernetic creations. The fact of the matter being that the world government is all about appearances. Bartholomew Kuma was an especially gentle soul, but even more than that, he was a revolutionary and he was a king. To pervert and defile his visage and legacy in such a way is an overt demonstration of their power and something we are certain they would opt to do if given the opportunity once more. Presently, in the world of One Piece, there are 3 known versions of the Hito Hito no Mi. Firstly, there is the Hito Hito no Mi proper, which was consumed by Chopper. Second, there is a mythical version of the Hito Hito no Mi, possessed by former Fleet Admiral Sengoku, which is modeled Daibutsu, or Giant Gold Buddha. Then finally, we have the true name of Luffy's fruit, the Hito Hito no Mi, modeled Nika, the Sun God. All of which, of course, being Zoan-type fruits. And it is in understanding these 2 other versions that we may better understand that of Luffy's. In the case of Chopper's fruit, he possesses a myriad of fruit-based transformations. More transformations than any other Zoan-type fruit users we have ever seen in the series by a long shot. Now, in the same vein, in now knowing Luffy's fruit to be a Zoan-type as well, we may also regard each of his various transformations to be of a similar sort. Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd may more or less be considered techniques, sure, but with this stuff in mind, it is not hard to look at the various iterations of Gear 4th a bit differently. Bound Man, Tank Man, and Snake Man. Oh, and of course his newfound peak, Gear 5th. With that being said, Luffy's Zoan transformations are of a very particular sort that severely differentiate them from all others. And that is the sheer fact that as opposed to how other Zoans inherently acquire their transformations, typically ranging from human to hybrid to beast, Luffy possesses no such intrinsic understanding and or capability. I mean, upon consumption of a fruit, a user is said to immediately know the name of the fruit, yet Luffy clearly lacks any such knowledge even now, and that's because of what his fruit represents. The fruit is the power of freedom incarnate, to the point of not even its name being forced upon him. Not only that, but his power, according to the Gorosei, is only limited by the creativity of the user. This has been exemplified since the very beginning of the series. There appears to be a general trial period among Devil Fruit users wherein they must become accustomed to their newfound capabilities, such as when Blackbeard had first acquired the power of the late Whitebeard's Gura Gura no Mi. However, the extent to which Luffy struggled to get his fruit to work for him is on a whole different level. But of course, Luffy by far has the most extensive list of techniques and uses of his power in the entire series. and the same may be said of his various transformations, the bulk of which he had concocted during his training with Rayleigh on Rushkaina Island for the sake of combating the island's more troublesome animals. Speaking of which, according to Rob Lucci's explanation of Zoan-type fruits, a particular characteristic they possess is the capacity for growth. The more you train, the more your power is amplified. Therefore, in regards to aggressive attacks, Zoan types are the strongest. Now, although Chopper possesses more transformations than Luffy, prior to his acclimation to such things, Chopper required the use of his Rumble Balls to acquire even a fraction of Luffy's creativity afforded power. Luffy's fruit does not decide anything for its user. It all comes down to Luffy's free will and creativity, aspects which one may very much liken to the hallmarks of humanity, sure, as this is a human fruit, but at least biblically, man was made in the image of God, therefore elevating such things to their Omega equivalents. In fact, the three versions of the fruit may be placed in a sort of ascension-based hierarchy, Chopper's being that of the mortal man, Sengoku's being that of the enlightened man, and Luffy's being that of a god, the likes of which NIKA has to varying extents been revered indiscriminately across cultures for centuries. The fable depicts him to be a figure of reverence that freed slaves in ancient times, and although this particular account is not consistent across cultures, the concept of solar reverence itself very much is, both subtly and majorly. And this is even the case with cultures that likely have not intersected in countless generations, from the giants of Elbaf to the fishmen of Fishman Island to the Kozuki clan of Wano to the ancient Shandians. The world government fears Nika and Joy Boy because of the freedom associated with them. At this point, we know these figures are the very same person, and they are associated with freeing slaves. While slavery was prohibited 200 years ago, the Celestial Dragons still practice slavery as they are above said laws. And furthermore, despite slavery being illegal, the world government is actually okay with it to an extent, as there are secret auctions which they allow. The reason for this is likely that they need the markets to remain intact for the Celestial Dragons to acquire new slaves. If they were to have the markets completely destroyed, acquiring slaves would be too much of an inconvenience. The Celestial Dragons also possess a particular fascination with the enslavement of exotic races, which has given way for quite a bloodstained history. They have incurred the animosity of many lands and many people, many of which in a general sense may be considered physically superior to humans, despite lacking the numbers to truly contest. By their lonesome, these outliers could not possibly hope to resist their oppressors. Yet in union under Joy Boy, the impossible becomes possible and the oppressed become free. The world government wants total control, and Joy Boy, the unifying beacon of hope associated with that, is a threat to them and all that they stand for. This is why, with Luffy having awakened his Devil Fruit's true abilities, the pressure on him and the crew will increase tremendously, the true reasoning of which they will be able to spin in a multitude of negative ways. Now, as a reminder, despite Vegapunk's scientific endeavors lacking automaticity from the discretion of the world government, he may very well have his own agenda behind the scenes, the likes of which may have gone entirely undetected, as of course he is a genius and has complied with them for quite some time. And despite the frequency of his dragon-related experiments perhaps bearing connections to the Celestial Dragons, there is of course the underlying possibility of a connection between him and the revolutionaries led by Monkey D. Dragon. After all, he did provide Kuma with enough grace to aid the Straw Hats before the cyborg entirely lost his freedom, an action which certainly played a major role in the shifting of their fates. And at that, there is a certain duality to the representation of dragons. On one hand, you have the hoarding of wealth and treasure in addition to the predatory manipulation of the weak, which is represented by the Celestials. And on the other, you have creatures of ultimate freedom, as they may take to both land and the skies, free of borders and the like, along with the power to ensure the maintenance of such a luxury, which is represented by the Revolutionary Army. There is to be no doubt that an impending war is inevitable. It has been presumed to be this way for quite some time now, but even more so in the wake of Luffy's full-fledged status as Joy Boy. On account of the revelry, the world government commenced the dissolution of the warlord system, therefore creating a sort of power vacuum, as one of the three great powers is no longer operational. Yet in its place, Vegapunk seems to be taking an even more active role, as he, along with the science unit of the Marines, will be leading the SSG, or Special Science Group, the details of which are presently unclear, but to make up for power possessed by the various warlords of the sea, you already know it is going to be a force to be reckoned with. After all, the pacifists were certainly devastating during Marineford. Meanwhile, apparently, we have not even seen the latest and greatest of the Pacifista initiative, as the PX5 and PX7 models dealt with post-time skip were said to be outdated models from 2 years ago. And need I remind you, the machinations of Vegapunk are centuries ahead of his peers, so 2 years is a major difference. a lot may have very well changed. Now, what if it's not necessarily that the artificial copy of Kaido's Devil Fruit was a failure, but instead, the fact that Vegapunk discerned that an artificial copy of Luffy's would be? I mean, think about it. Remember, the hallmarks of its abilities rely heavily upon creativity and freedom, the likes of which some world government and or marine pawns would be incredibly unlikely to possess. Sure, with a muted will, it may become more easily tamed, but it would then lack the same pinnacle of ridiculousness that its superior excels with. And so even if such a thing were to be mass-produced, the results wouldn't really be worthwhile in the hands of most people. Yet even still, there are those in the ranks of the Marines at least that one might argue defy such stereotypes. And for us, chief among them would have to be the likes of the now Captain Kobe. Kobe is arguably the Marine most similar to Luffy besides his own grandfather, Garp. He is courageous and is very much willing to stand up for what he believes in, even at the expense of his own safety and life, as seen by his standing up to Akainu towards the end of Marineford. In fact, as expressed by Shanks, this very decision of his may very well have changed the fate of their entire world. Kobe is most definitely a fan of Luffy's and indebted to him for life, eliminating any potential desire to bring him harm. However, when it comes down to it, Luffy is a pirate and Kobe is a Marine. He may very well represent the establishment's capacity for change by way of young blood, but regardless, he is still a part of said establishment. Kobe for a long time now has, in the best ways possible, been sort of like an off-brand Luffy. He's gotten considerably stronger over the course of the series, and despite being a part of a system that facilitates figures of corruption, just like how Luffy as a pirate is part of a major movement that possesses many nefarious and dastardly pirates, the two have remained true to themselves and their own ideals. And during Marineford, where both were present, the two of them also struggled to find proper footing amongst this sea of veteran and or experienced combatants. They were the new guys trying their best to keep up, yet in the upcoming war, Luffy will most definitely be at the forefront of the movement. So why wouldn't the same be the case for Kobe in relation to his side? All it would take for Kobe to be factored into these recent events would be for X Drake to survive, which despite his defeat at the hands of CP0, given the general mortality rate of the series, is highly likely. And the reason X Drake is important in this context at all is because of the two sharing a link by way of the secret special force, SWORD. Together, the two conduct covert operations for unknown reasons. However, the transgressions of CP0, especially against Luffy, will not be lost on them even if the truth is covered up by the world government. The awakening of Luffy's fruit and existence of Momonosuke as the Lord of Wano Sovereign and the user of the replicated fruit of Kaido will have the world government scrambling to not only suppress the truth, but retaliate accordingly. Given their overwhelming fear of such a reality and the solid proof that Vegapunk's artificial devil fruit was indeed a success, the game may change completely. The Beast Pirates at that point would only become that more of a precursor for what is to come, as suddenly the world government would come to harness a power of a similar and certainly far more dangerous sort. Even beyond the replication of Joy Boy, just imagine each of the many pacifistas also possessing copies of Kuma's fruit, at which point we are talking about the equivalent of Sentinels from X-Men. You are looking at a man-hunting strike force that can traverse the world virtually instantaneously. Now that is one way to easily commit a mass genocide or cleansing, as Igorose put it. There is even the possibility of harnessing devil fruit weaponry in mass, as Vegapunk detailed the process of providing such powers to the inanimate, which we have seen on several occasions over the course of the series. It looks like things are getting real, even in the case of clones. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.